What's up, everybody? I'm Charlie Marlowe. That's Brendan Schaefer. This is Low Hanging Fruit. I think it's episode 4. I'll check on that. But
I think
Brendan,
that's right.
it's the time of year. Yeah, let's be honest. It's the time of year where there ain't much going on. We need spring training to happen. We need pitchers and catchers to report. I'm not going to talk about Matt Carpenter, the 26th man on the roster for the 87th straight day. So we decided let's do a mailbag. I put it out there on Twitter, Brendan, and man, we got a lot of responses, a lot of questions, a lot of comments. That's good to see.
Yeah, and we're a little starved for content, so we're appreciative of people kind of reaching out. Some of the comments pretty humorous, but we kind of said, hey, one size fits all. We're going to go through all of these, and maybe some of them will be able to pontificate upon a little more than others. But I think everybody that kind of chimed in is gonna have their voice heard, so that'll be good.
Yes, I'm gonna probably read all of them. I'm starting at the bottom because it's easier for me as I scroll backwards on Twitter. So here we go. Boom. This is just I haven't done any research. Shocking. I didn't even edit any of them out. I'm gonna read them unless they're just awful. So here's the
Nothing
first one,
heinous,
Brendan.
hopefully, but I think people were
Right.
pretty respectful.
I'll skip the bad ones. And I don't
Okay.
think any of them were that
No,
bad.
I
Okay,
don't.
first one.
Nothing I saw was.
Yeah. Okay, from Billiken. Kevin N. Right out of the gate. When does Ollie get fired? Time to move on. He has no leadership skills. Brendan, that's the question or comment. Go ahead.
This is going to be a long show, isn't it? So I think we've kind of touched a little bit on that of like this year matters, and it matters not only for Ollie but for John Mozeliak and kind of the build of the roster and the direction of the payroll. Like I think it matters in a lot of ways. Would Ollie get fired if they have another repeat of April, like they go 10-19? I don't know. Maybe they would be pretty aggressive in that regard. I feel like though, even if it's a rudderless ship middle of the season, you still get a few months to kind of ease your way in. But then let's say they're not dreadful, but they're not great. They're kind of somewhere in the middle. I think you let that season play out, you let his contract play out, and then it's not like if they've made the decision that, hey, we're going to move on from Ollie Marmol because you win 80 games and it's just kind of a middle of the pack type of year for the Cardinals. I think it's a lot easier to do that after the season and say, hey, we let this contract play out. Last couple of seasons didn't go the way we wanted, and maybe we're going to move in a new direction. I think short of a winning season, that's probably the result, at least in my opinion, Charlie. I'm not sure how you see it. It's just it feels like it's easier to do with a guy when he doesn't have a long-term contract. You're not actively firing him so much as you are, hey, thanks for your service, but maybe we're not renewing your deal if this season doesn't go the right direction.
Yeah, I think it makes sense that the Cardinals have done what they're doing right now. Ollie does not deserve to be fired yet. I think that's fair to say. He does not deserve to get an extension. He had one good year, he had one really bad year. Let's prove it in year 3. And maybe you'll appreciate this analogy, but I think about it kind of like the way I thought about Eli Drinkwitz in football, Mizzou football, entering last fall. Eli Drinkwitz, I think, surprised people in 2020. COVID had a nice year, mediocre after that, and it was basically proven. I think it was fair to say entering Mizzou's football season in 2023 that Eli Drinkwitz does not deserve to be fired, but he also at this point doesn't deserve a big time extension. Prove it. He did that. He absolutely did that. Now he deserves the extension. Huge season. Ollie has the same opportunity. I think that's fair. If Ollie has a nice year, he gets the extension. He deserves it. If they have a really bad year, he's gone. As we've talked about a couple times, if he has that middle year, 84 wins, no playoffs, that's when it gets interesting.
What do you think would happen in that event? Like 84 specifically, let's say 86 is the last wild card. Cardinals fall 2 games short. You've got Yadier Molina kind of lurking around because everybody knows he wants to be a big league manager. And unsurprisingly, he wasn't necessarily ready to take the time away from his family and the other things he wants to do in retirement to be part of the full-time staff this year. Said, yeah, I'll get involved, but it's going to kind of be on my terms. I think for a manager role, he'd be ready to take that leap because that comes with more cachet, more power, more responsibility. And I think he would probably welcome that. But what do you think happens at 84 wins? Do the Cardinals make that move, or is 84 enough to say, hey, we played all right, and Ollie Marmol is a guy that we still believe in? It's impossible to say, but I'm curious if you have a take on what you predict would happen in that case.
I really don't have a great answer because the Cardinals are so measured in what they do. I think other franchises would for sure fire Ollie. The Cardinals are maybe one of the few that wouldn't, but the Yachty, Descalzo, piece changes the conversation? I don't have a great answer. We have talked about this before. I'm not trying to move on. I don't know, but that's the great question that we're going to basically tackle as the year goes on. Hopefully, the Cardinals are really good. We don't have to worry about it. I don't want to wish for them being bad, but for content, it's almost better
Oh,
to just be right in the
Charlie,
middle and be boring.
you sly dog.
Just don't be boring, is all I'm saying.
I
Okay.
think that's fair. I think that's fair. I'll go ahead and answer it though, since you kind of were wishy washy. I think if the Cardinals win 84 games, and I am probably people that listen to my content or read my content probably think that I'm more on the pro Ollie side than neutral. But I think what the Cardinals would do, short of a playoff appearance, is they'd frame it as we're just moving on. I think they would move on from Ollie short of a playoff appearance. Right or wrong, whether I do it or not isn't the question. I think the Cardinals would. I think they're going to sense that appetite from the fan base that, hey, we need to do something more substantive if we're going to continue to sell the organization is moving in the right direction.
I would lean towards that as well. I'm going to go, let's say 55-45 or
Okay,
60-40. I
that's
agree
fair.
with you on that. Okay, next question. Jeff Younger. When will the Cardinals acquire a stud left handed batter? Why do the Cardinals let the switch hitters continue to make outs from the left side of the plate? And I would
This is
just,
good.
I'll start quick. I mean, Nolan Gorman, I know he's a little banged up. Brendan Donovan, Lars Nootbaar. You got the switch hitters. You got Alec Burleson. Hey, we got Matt Carpenter now. By the way, I mean, the Cardinals have a lot of left handed pop, right? I mean, some of those guys need to prove it and be healthy, but there's a lot of guys there that have big potential, in my opinion.
I think Gorman definitely from the pop perspective, like he's a power hitter. Lars Nootbaar, I think, is a more complete hitter. He'll take his walks. He'll hit for doubles power. How many home runs he'll hit maybe is a question, but those are two guys that you feel good about anchoring. I think more toward when I think of the middle of the lineup, like 2 through 6, you could put them in spots and feel good about the production that they'll give in those spots. Donovan, more of an on base guy. He showed a little pop last year as well, so I think that's a fair characterization. But I also do see room for a left-handed power threat that could play center field. A guy who could mash right-handed pitching and play center field. Because when we say switch hitters, really we're talking about the two guys that the Cardinals are sort of pigeonholing into that center field battle this year, Tommy Edman and Dylan Carlson. The problem is they're both better as right-handed hitters against left-handed pitching. They have the same kind of splits dynamic, and they don't complement one another well from a plate profile perspective. It'd be nice if they, and I'm just going to say the name that he's not going to sign with the Cardinals. The Cardinals aren't going to pursue him at the price. But I've said for 2 years, I think Cody Bellinger, in terms of what he does on the field, you drop him into this roster, and it would make the lineup with Bellinger. You'd be able to do all the right left kind of stuff that you want, and I think it would be a really deep lineup. I know that's not the way that they're gonna approach things because the offseason began with him wanting 200 million. I don't think he'll get that. He's still unsigned for some reason. So I doubt he gets that. But it's going to be a sizable contract. I don't think the Cardinals are in the market for that. And then they would look at it and say, well, what do we do with Dylan Carlson and Tommy? Well, you could have traded one of those guys. And if you were going to be aggressive, you could have done all these things. That's a move that I think would be really compelling. It never will happen in a million years. To answer the question from the listener, I just don't think the Cardinals are going down that road.
No chance. And also, isn't it funny? What will they do with Dylan Carlson? And now it's Dylan Carlson's the fourth outfielder. We a couple years ago we're like, what's going to happen with Dylan Carlson? And now the question is like, well, it's Dylan Carlson. He's a fourth outfielder, or we'll see what happens.
Doesn't it feel like he's on the Tyler O'Neill track 1 year ahead, with the distinction being that last year they told Tyler O'Neill, like, you get your every opportunity to prove that you still belong here. And then he failed at that and they traded him for peanuts. Carlson, they're basically like, yeah, you might play some. We'll see. Like, there's no guarantees for Carlson's playing time. And like, I like Dylan Carlson. I was a big supporter of his last year. I'm not predicting big things from him this year because I think he's behind the 8 ball before they even go down to spring. It's not really fair to him, but from like a standpoint of, hey, guys being told that you're our guy and getting a chance, he's not really being told that right now. And I don't know what kind of impact that's going to have on his psyche. I hope I am wrong because I really like the guy. I like him as a player. I like his skill set, but I think it's going to be difficult for him to maximize himself in the role that is at least plotted out for him as of today.
I'm going to call an audible and briefly go away from the comments for a second because you mentioned Tyler O'Neill. Did you happen to watch the interview of Tyler O'Neill on Foul Territory?
No, I missed it. Recap it for me.
Okay. So basically, I want to say it's about 20 minutes. It
Okay.
was maybe 5 days ago. So, folks, if you want to go back, Foul Territory, the show with AJ Przinsky and those guys, they have former players on the show, and they have a bunch of. I mean, they get all the players. So, just recapping for anybody that didn't see it. Now, Tyler O'Neill was very professional. He did not, I would not say at all he threw Ali Marmol under the bus. But AJ Przinsky asked him a couple questions about everything that happened last year. And AJ said, "Look, man, I think I'd have reacted. I'd have been really mad about that, blah, 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 blah." And so Tyler O'Neill says, "Yeah, I think I handled it the right way in the moment." He basically said that their relationship evolved into, and I think the exact quote was respect at arm's length,
Yeah.
which is not a lot. I mean, look, clearly I don't love the dude. He doesn't love me, but he is my manager. I'm a player. Respect at arm's length. Then there was a follow-up question where, again, this is very subtle. And the question was about, Tyler, what did you do in 2021 when you had your big year, eighth in the MVP and all that? And Tyler O'Neill did make, and I can't remember the exact way the question was asked. So people go, I'm not trying to mischaracterize it. He said something about the fact that the culture and the leadership that year was so great. Remember, that was 2021. That's the year
Right.
they go on the 17-game winning streak. That's Mike Schilt as the manager. It's very subtle. I'm not trying to start something out of nothing, but if folks go watch that, there were a couple little subtle digs of Tyler O'Neill giving his perspective on the situation with Ali Marmol, which I think is very interesting, but it wasn't earth shattering. But if you're a Cardinals fan, you should watch it.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to like the culture conversations and the little nuggets that are dropped here and there, the immediate draw is going to be Schilt v. Ollie. Like that's what the fan base is going to see and think about, and when they're hearing these comments, I it could be deeper than that though, right? And not so much as like deeper as there's a really big rift there that we didn't uncover, but like you know, I do think, and we hate to always go back to it, but you think about Yadier Molina. Yadier Molina was sort of like the captain of the clubhouse for a long, long time. And he was there in 21, wasn't there this past year. And so did the clubhouse, did that ripple effect have such an impact that the dynamic was just different in there? I don't know. Maybe that's giving too much credit to one guy. But I think there are probably some other distinctions as well. You can think about leadership as well in terms of the coaching staff, right? You may not love Jeff Albert as a Cardinal fan. You may have wanted him gone. You got your wish. You may have had your varying thoughts about, Mike Maddox isn't maximizing this staff, but it was a more green coaching staff top to bottom with a new bench coach as well that, was kind of thrust in last minute. So like you can make some other comparisons to 21 versus 23 that were different, that weren't just the manager, but kind of knowing how Tyler felt. I think he was relatively candid if he used that term respect at arm's length. But at the same time, you can kind of get a feel for maybe just where he would have been. And when your manager kind of undresses you within the first week of the season, to get the respect at arm's length quote is probably about the best you're going to hear as a result of that, because that was an awkward time and nobody wanted it to be that way. But once that cat was out of the bag, it sort of probably did, at least for those two individuals, have an impact on the way they were going to rebuild the relationship the rest of the year.
Yeah, I think it was fair and true. But if you're having a beer with Tyler O'Neill, is he going to use different language? Probably. But he was a
You might.
professional
Yeah.
in this setting. All right, next question. I'll just throw it right to you. This is from Jeebers99. Should the Cardinals trade for Manoa, Alec Manoa?
Yeah, pending the price, I think so. But so with these questions, it's difficult because until a guy is actually traded, it's hard to say what his value is to the Blue Jays, right? Like if they keep him, that tells you that I'm sure they were willing to move him this offseason, but because they haven't, it's like, they probably haven't gotten the offers they were looking for, or they maybe view this guy's upside as being a little bit more worthwhile than the players that are coming in terms of trade. So I think to contextualize it, you'd have to almost throw out a name. Like, would you do Burleson for Manoa if you're John Mozeliak? I don't know that that's an option for them, but you look at like the way they've stocked up on first base slash outfield types and left-handed hitters. You just rattled off a bunch of them. Is that a trade that could burn you if Manoa is just completely broken and we haven't seen the best of Burley yet and he's got so much team control attached? Perhaps. But like the upside of what if you get a capable starter who can strike out 200 guys? Like, what if you fix him? So, like, if that's the range you're talking about, it's one thing. If the Blue Jays say, we really need Tommy Edman, we really need Brendan Donovan, you're like, all right, no wonder this guy hasn't been traded. I don't know if that is a a fair way to answer the question, but it's always kind of within the context of, well, what's it going to cost you?
By the way, is it Sagisi, Sagisi, Sagasi,
Sajasi. Thomas
Sagasi,
Sajasi. Yes, sir.
Thomas Sagasi? Okay, so Luke McGill asks, or this is actually more of a statement. He says Carp comes back with a fury, earns ABs, hits 20 dingers.
Ooh,
Sagasi performs so well he gets called up. Gibson, Gray, Matz, and Lynn are better than advertised. 200 innings for Miles. Goldie and the Nolans go 270, 30 bombs, and 90 RBI. Sell 3 million ticks again. I agree with that one. Playoff appearance. So, real quick going through that. Carp comes back. I think he'll have a decent year. I'll go under on the 20 dingers.
I think a lot
Uh,
of this sounds optimistic just
yes,
off the jump.
it's very optimistic. I could see Lynn. I could see Matt. These guys just have to stay healthy.
Yeah.
Sonny Gray, I could actually see Sonny Gray coming back a bit, but that still means a good year. I mean, he had his best years ever with the Twins. The Nolans, I mean, going 270, 30, and 90, I could see all three of those guys. Goldie's probably more of like a 25 homer guy, to be fair.
I
3
don't know.
million
He
tickets,
runs into
yes.
him. He could run into
Yeah,
home
he
runs.
does. What did he have? Okay, Goldie, what did he have the last couple of years? I know he had 36 the one year with the Diamondbacks. I'll look that up.
Yeah.
You can go ahead and respond while I look that up.
Well, what's the question? Is there a question or is it just more
It's
of a
more of a
commentary?
statement. It was more of a very positive statement of Luke McGill thinking the Cardinals are going to be pretty dang good this year.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, and for Goldie, he hit 25 this past year. His MVP year was only 2022, 2 years ago. He hit 35 home runs, had 115 RBIs. I don't really care about his batting average. I'm more, what's the on base, what's the slug going to be? He went from a 981 OPS to 810. I think you need him back around 875 or more, and you could feel pretty good about that. Arenado, I think, was actually sub 800 this past year. He needs to be closer to 850 again. I look at OPS more so than batting average if you're just trying to give like one simple stat because, does this guy get on base? Does he slug? Combine them. What's that look like? 850 for Arenado feels like a good goal. I don't think Carpenter has that kind of year. Like of all the things that were kind of mentioned there by Luke, I think that's the one where I would pump the brakes on. I could see Sajasi having another great start to AAA, and then the Cardinals by midseason saying, when there's an injury, somebody goes on the 15-day, Gorman's back, he needs a quick IL stint. Sajasi comes up and maybe just stays the rest of the way if he performs. Like I could see that as somewhat plausible. Let me ask you about the starting pitching angle on that. You kind of mentioned maybe a step back for Gray compared to what he just did, but that's still pretty good because he was a Cy
Yes.
Young candidate in the AL. Let me compare Lynn with Gibson to who has the higher upside to you for what you expect this coming season. But does that same guy also have the higher floor? Because I would say one's got the floor, but one's got the upside. And they're different.
So I'm guessing you're saying that Gibson's floor is higher and Lance Lynn's ceiling is higher. And I also think coming off last year, Lance Lynn was so bad, especially with the White Sox, that if he cleans a few things up, it's not difficult for Lance Lynn to have a much better year. Now, with Kyle Gibson, I'm not going to focus on the win-loss record, which was really good. I'll focus with pitchers more on ERA and innings. I think Kyle Gibson will probably have a similar year, maybe not as many wins. I think Lance Lynn could have a much better year. Still a lot of strikeouts, but bringing that ERA down to the 4 type range, hopefully. And if it's 4.5, whatever. I could just see him having a nice bounce back year, not giving up nearly as many home runs at Busch Stadium.
And he still struck out more than a batter per inning last year. Now, a lot of that did come with the White Sox. It's kind of weird. And it was a question I asked him at winter warmup because I was curious about the switch. Like, did the Dodgers ask him to do some things differently? Because when you look, his ERA was better with LA, but he also hardly struck out anybody. And I think they sort of, from the answer he gave, they sort of maybe had a track that they thought, hey, you could be successful here in the short term. They just kind of wanted him to get them through some innings because the Dodgers were having a lot of trouble with their rotation and injuries and that stuff. So I think what you saw with the Dodgers isn't exactly who he's going to be this year. What you saw with the White Sox isn't exactly who he's going to be. But if he's able to sort of compile the best of both worlds, which is what he had done for many, many seasons prior, like he's never had a bad year like the one he just had. So if that was an anomaly and we can point to the White Sox just being an absolute you know what. I mean, it was just terrible. Talked to the cat last week about this on Hot Take Central, where he said some things he heard about that Chicago team, and you kind of saw when he was trying to, get an interview with Joe Kelly over the course of a weekend, just saw it didn't look right. And so it would make a lot of sense that Lance Lynn has some upside to be like more than just people lump Gibson and Lynn in the same category, and I would make the case that they're not the same, even though they signed a similar contract. Lynn's got upside to regain the status of like a number 2 or a number 3. Gibson's going to be your number 5, but I think you can rely upon him to do so. There's not a floor that's going to drop out on Gibson. He's been pretty steady over the course of his career.
And so people know I also like to cite FIP. With the White Sox, Lance Lynn's ERA was 6.47, but his FIP was 5.19. So almost a run and a half ish lower. With the
Right.
Dodgers, his ERA was 4.36, but his FIP was what? 6.16. So some of those behind the scenes numbers were actually worse with the Dodgers, even though his ERA was better. When you basically throw them together, 5.73 ERA for the year and a 5.53 FIP, which is pretty much the same. But again, I think he can drop that down a full run. So
Yes.
maybe saying 4, maybe 4 is too
I don't
aggressive.
know.
But if
I don't
he's
know
at
if it
if he's
is.
at 4.5, if his stats end on a quality start, which is 6 innings, 3 runs earned, 4.5, Cardinals fans I think would love that if he can throw 180 innings.
How important do you think the quality start is to the Cardinals this year? Because I know Ben Fred with the Post-Dispatch wrote an article where he sort of cited that. And it's always kind of
Mhm.
the elephant in the room when you ask the Cardinals about it, because you don't want there are the factions of baseball fans who, with particular stats, they look at it and they get a little bit fixated on it. And so to ask a member of the Cardinals, hey, how important is a quality start for you guys? All they would say, look, we don't look at how many quality starts did we log, because it's kind of a random, like, who decided that 6 innings and 3 or fewer runs is what qualifies for this number. But like, if you look at just the nature of what that would mean for the team, if they're getting more 6 and 3 type of performances from spots 3, 4, and 5 in their rotation, that I think would actually mean a lot to the Cardinals this year with the way that they're built. You kind of see that being the case for this year's team.
Yeah, and by the way, so I don't have the numbers on this, but I listen to Bernie Miklasz on 590 The Fan a lot, and he's also been talking about this a lot, and he's cited the numbers, and it's not just with the Cardinals, but it's across Major League Baseball. So I don't have them exactly, but it's one of those things where your team win-loss record is amazing when you get a quality start. And I think sometimes we focus on the quality start being, oh, it's 6 innings, 3 earned runs, but all of the great starts are also in there in the quality starts. So, and it also gets back to our conversation we had last year about Wayno. Look, if you're going 6, even if you're allowing 3, you're setting up your bullpen real nice
Yep.
like to have that law firm of 7, 8, 9, whoever it is in a given year, to come in and do their roles. You're not asking for more. You're not asking for guys usually to go multiple innings. It's not just the 6 innings and 3 earned runs. It's you're in the game, you're pitching well, you're going pretty deep by today's standards, and you're allowing the bullpen guys to have nice, easy roles they can get used to.
And I think that's why it matters. And it's not like a perfect, overly analytical type of stat to just go, yeah, 6 and 3 feels about right for what we're going to call a quality start. And so that's why, the new age baseball folk and the Cardinals, they do look at analytics and things like that. So quality start is not something that they probably measure specifically and say, hey, we want this to be the goal, to rack up as many as we can. But from like, take a step back, it's okay to take a more simplistic view and say, if you do those things, everything else does fall into place. So maybe it's not what they're chasing, but they signed the type of pitchers that are going to potentially be able to give them a good number of those things. So I think that it does it's not like a predictive stat, but for this year's team, it feels like the way they're building themselves to do exactly what you said. Take a little pressure off the bullpen, allow the guys that they use to have a chance to close out the game. And it can be in a win, because if you've got the lineup that you think is going to be top 10, top 8, top 5, you're probably getting to 4 runs in a game most of the time. And so you can win some 4-3, 5-4 types of games that way. And that's the way they're kind of building themselves in like the best version of what happens this year.
And here's a good example I think you could see. Giovanni Gallegos, who I actually think is underrated, even though he had a bad year last year. Overall, he's been really good for the Cardinals. And I think with him, a lot of it comes down to usage. And I think Giovanni Gallegos will be much better and more like pre 2023 Gio if he doesn't have to pitch as much. And if folks like Gibson and Lynn and Miles and Matt, whoever, if they can go deeper, let's just say that's an appearance every 2 weeks, let's say, that Gio doesn't have to throw. That matters over the course of 162.
It does, and what's interesting too about that is we talk about Ryan Helsley, and just attached to his name is just this reputation for, oh, he doesn't want to pitch as much, he doesn't want to go back to back, and these things that I think sometimes he gets painted in an unfair light. Like the Cardinals maybe do need more consistency from him or durability from him, but that's sort of the narrative that surrounds him. But Gio is the type that, like, yeah, I'll take the ball every day, and sometimes I'll get whacked because of it, but like now people say, oh, Gio stinks because his ERA is higher, and it's the same thing. It's just two sides of the same coin, and everybody's going to look better if they aren't needing to go to those guys with such frequency. And it has a trickle down effect on the bullpen too, because if you're getting through 6 instead of 4, whoever that guy is that would have to eat up the meaningless middle innings of a game, that guy's now going to be available the next day too, and maybe more of a leveragey role. And it just makes everybody better. And I think that's the way the Cardinals are building themselves. Whether it will work, we're going to have to find out. But that's their plan. That's the process of how they see it playing out in a perfect world.
Okay, moving on here. Let's see. Johnny McClain asks on Twitter, where is the offense going to come from? The outfield is stacking up to be below average. Wynn will be glove first, and Donnie has to prove he's healthy. Plus, Arenado and Goldie are on the wrong side of 30 and coming off down years. Okay, I'll just say before I throw to you, this is the second winter in a row where I'm telling people I'm not worried about the offense. I'm just not. I'm not worried about the offense. I think the offense, it was trending decent last year. It ended up with poor numbers. You also had a lot of down years and injuries. I think the Cardinals will have a top 10-ish offense if you're looking at OPS, which is a number we both look at. I'm not worried about the offense personally, but what do you think about what Johnny McClain said?
And I think it's interesting too when you look at last year, like the cumulative numbers aren't going to look that good because they had a full month at the end where if you had a hangnail, you were on the IL to end the year. Like the guys they had running out to help accumulate those numbers the last few weeks are not going to be contributing to this year's team. So I think the offense can be okay too, but let's kind of lay out why we might think that. When you look at the corners, start with Goldie and Arenado. Better or worse than last year for those two guys, or maybe about the same as my cat joins the show in the background.
I love it. I would say Goldie for sure better. I have to look at Arenado's numbers. I
See,
would
his
say
numbers were pretty
Arenado.
bad. I think he'll be better.
Yeah,
I think Nolan
I
will be
think
better.
they'll. I think they'll both be, let's just say, 5 to 15% better
I
ish.
think that's fair. Arenado finished with a 774 OPS. Outside of the COVID year, which was his final year with the Rockies, that's the lowest year of his career, going back to his rookie year when he was lower. Like, I think Arenado kind of got swept up a little bit in the pressure of we got to win 5 games today so we can make it up in the standings. He constantly said he wasn't looking at the standings and yet always knew exactly where the Cardinals were in the standings. So I feel like he put a lot of pressure on himself and felt like he had to be the guy to do it all, and that weighed on him. He didn't hit a home run, like one home run the last month and a half or something. He really kind of fell off the pace. I think he'll be a renewed guy in a renewed clubhouse this year. Mentioned Donovan, but let me go where I think it's interesting. Jordan Walker, you think he goes up this year? I think he does naturally because he was a rookie last year and he gets a little better. Newt Barr, what do you think he does compared to last year? I think you can expect about the same, but there's maybe some room for growth as well.
Yeah, and by the way, so I think Arenado, yeah, like a 10%. He was a 109 OPS plus, and this is where too. Like sometimes I forget. Goldie's OPS was 120, so that was better than I OPS plus, I
OPS
should
plus,
say,
yeah.
was better. So here's a good deal. This is where it helps because I don't have a good memory. I was doing a video the other day about WAR, and this, believe me, I'm going to answer your question. I was going through the players and I was kind of thinking in my head, what kind of year did they have? What was their WAR? It surprised me. Lars Nootbaar's WAR last year was 3.3, Brendan, and he played 117 games. So he basically missed 25% of the season and still put up a 3.3 WAR, which obviously is you as a total baseball player. But I think that speaks to his potential. His career OPS plus is 116. So Lars Nootbaar had a better year than you even thought, I think, perception wise, for most people last year, and he was hurt. So I think there's a lot of upside there. If he just stays healthy and he's the same player, that's a hell of a player.
Yeah, but now so far we've given optimistic views on the two corner outfielders, the two corner infielders. I think Wilson will be about the same guy offensively behind the plate. He was good last year. I think Wilson will probably be good again. A little streaky at times, but he can carry you. Up the middle is where I think it gets interesting. And I've gotten a lot of questions about this. If they're playing as Edmund in center and Wynn at short, who hit 150 when he got a chance last year, what does that look like in terms of can they carry those two guys offensively if everybody else doesn't take a huge step forward? Like, does that become a chasm at the bottom of the lineup? Or do you think Tommy Edmond can be about league average, which is what he's always been on OPS plus? And then what's Mason Wynn do? Those are the two guys that I think offensively. I don't like defensively. I think they'll both do their role. But if they're 8 and 9 in the lineup, is that enough? Can the lineup have enough? What do you kind of see from those two offensively?
So as you said, Tommy Edmonds' career OPS plus is right there at 100. He was
Yeah.
91 last year. Let's just say league average 95, whatever it is, 100. Okay, you can deal with that. Center fielder, even though I don't love the fact he is your center fielder, I think it's fair to say Mason Wynn is probably going to be below average in his first year, first full-time year in the bigs, although I think he'll be better as his career progresses. But let's just look at it like that. Is it fair to say from an OPS plus standpoint, those are probably the only Cardinals we would think, unless something crazy happens, that aren't above average? I'm telling you, maybe I'm wrong. I'll be proven wrong. I don't know. On paper, I really like the Cardinals position players. I really liked them last year, and I like them again. And I think there's a lot of upside for guys. I'm not even mentioning Dylan Carlson.
Right.
I don't even you might get something out of him. But again, Brendan Donovan is good, man, if he
He's
stays
really
healthy.
good.
Lars Nootbaar is good if he can stay healthy. Jordan Walker did some nice things offensively in his first year, and he was yo-yoed up and down. Mason Wynn, I'm going to give him a year, but he can steal bases. He can hit doubles. He can hit triples. And we're just talking about offense. Goldie and Arenado, even in their down years, are probably going to be 105, 110 OPS plus. If Gorman stays healthy, there's a lot of ifs here, but
We didn't even
man,
say his name yet. Nolan Gorman, the one
that's
guy
the
that could
thing.
probably hit 40. Like,
He could hit 40, and that's not even crazy. I know the back is barking, and that's a thing, but I love the Cardinals' core of young position players. So I'm not going to be one of those guys. I think the Cardinals are going to find a lot of offense.
and I want to make a comment about Brendan Donovan. He had the 115 OPS plus last year. He's 120 OPS plus in the 839 plate appearances that he's had as a big leaguer. His power went up a little bit. His slug and OBP for his career are neck and neck, but I think he can show a little more power if he's healthy through the full season. Brendan Donovan is the type of guy that works. I think he's going to continue to get better and to exploit the adjustments that pitchers are making to him. He's a really smart, savvy player. But even what Brendan Donovan has been so far is a 20% above league average offensive player. Oh, and he can play anywhere and kind of hold the fort down almost no matter where you put him defensively. That's a really valuable player as well. And strikeout wise, he struck out 123 times in his career. 100 that's 839 plate appearances. And last year, you had Goldschmidt and Gorman strike out for way more than that in just one season. Contreras was at 111. Like, he's striking out in almost 2 years the amount that some guys do in one. Brendan Donovan is going to be a huge factor. And honestly, Charlie, I don't know how you feel about this. I would lead him off. I almost don't care what your left, right is behind him. He would be my leadoff guy because I think Newt provides a little more power, get him toward the middle. I would lead off Brendan Donovan, and I think they're going to have a nice table setter if they do that.
Yeah, I think you'll mix and match, but I'm good with that for sure. Okay, so I like this next question. It's a different type of question. We're just going to bounce around. I'm just kind of going uh, basically reverse chronological order. This is from Iceman. Will the Cardinals ever pay full market value for a free agent ever again? The last one was Holiday, and they got a deal on it. And I think it's fair to say, and I agree with Iceman, I think he's thinking about a true free agent who's hitting around the normal time of 29, 30, 31 that you have to give a long deal because Sonny Gray is older. I like the Sonny Gray deal, but I do think that's different than signing a Jordan Montgomery or a Blake Snell or a Matt Holliday back in the day. What do you think of that? Because I know they tried to re-sign Jason Hayward, you tried to sign David Price, but the Cardinals really haven't done that. Am I wrong? Have they done the 7-year deal with anybody that wasn't in-house since
I
Holiday?
not like a 7-year deal. I mean, Wilson's was 5, but I think
Yeah.
when the Contreras deal happened, we knew they needed a catcher. He was already over 30, And my expectation was like they'll try to do like a 4 years, 77. And they basically almost got the fifth year for free from like what I thought was going to happen. They got a fifth year and it was barely more than I thought they'd have to pay him for four. And so, that was another deal. The answer is no. Like it'd have to be a really rare case to me to see the Cardinals do the type of deal on a free agent that is on that level of that caliber. It almost has to be like there are baked in attributes to the player of, well, does he want to be a Cardinal? Is there a history that we can really feel good about? Like they're very selective when they spend money on outside players. And even the Goldie and Arenado trades, that was going to lead to a commitment of a lot of money. But those guys, didn't they feel like Cardinals before they got here? So it almost needs to be
Yes.
that type of guy, in my opinion, before they'll ever do it. Like Blake Snell right now, I can't explain to you why he doesn't feel like a Cardinal guy, but he doesn't kind of feel like a Cardinal guy. And so I don't see them dropping 130, 150 million on him.
Yeah, that is funny about feels like a Cardinal
Just
guy.
has to
And
feel
once you
like
mentioned yeah, once you mentioned Wilson Contreras, I think it's fair to say that that was a fair or even above market deal for a catcher, because I do think you have to look at the catching position a little bit differently. There's not a lot of teams given a catcher that's about 30, 7 years. So I think it's fair to say that 5 years and 87 and a half for a catcher, that's the biggest deal Wilson Contreras was going to get. Let's be real.
I think so. Yeah. And so, like, to answer that question, it's all going to be contextual to the position and to who the guy is. But they just don't feel like the team that's going to go out in the market in a given year and say, like, oh, this is the marquee free agent of the year. Let's go get him, regardless of who he is. Or, it has to be a very specific set of circumstances before we really envision the Cardinals going in on a guy.
Okay, I like this next question here. So here it is. It is from Vance Lloyd. With the first month's worth of games being as tough as it is, what record will be acceptable to be considered successful? And I
I
will
like
give you
it.
the schedule. As you
Okay.
were talking, I wanted to make sure I can bring the schedule up. So here it
Yeah.
is. So folks know, starting four at the Dodgers, three, and when we say month, that starts in March, but we'll go the first month. So
Yeah.
four at the Dodgers, three at the Padres, three at home versus the Marlins, three at home versus the Phillies, three at the Diamondbacks.
Man.
Then you get the A's, the crappy A's, at
Yes.
the A's for three. You get home to the Brewers for three. You get home to the D backs for three. You get at the Mets for three. And then basically, we'll consider the Tigers the last series, even though it overlaps into May. But then you get at the Detroit Tigers to finish off April and to begin May right there. That's a pretty dang tough schedule.
Yes. I mean, 500, is that okay? Is a 500 first month okay,
Yes.
given where the schedule is? I would say that it is as well. Some of those teams, I mean, you get the D-backs, did they not just make the World Series? You play them 6 times in the first month. And then I guess you probably don't play them again. So that's maybe the benefit there is getting it out of the way. The schedule should ease up. But what happens is, or what I should say, what happens if you have all these games against teams that were really good last year, and then the season kind of chugs along, and then the teams that weren't so good last year sort of find their footing, and now games against like the Pirates and Reds later on, maybe that's not so easy this time around. Like it could be kind of a tough way for the schedule to shake out this year for the Cardinals.
Yeah, and let's look at it this way. You like to gamble. Let's just say
What?
on paper. Let's say on paper, should the Cardinals be favored in a series? And let's just go through real quick. I think it's
Okay.
fair to say they wouldn't be favored. And you can go after me. I think it's fair to say they wouldn't be favored against the Dodgers. I would say Padres is a toss up series. I would say Marlins toss up ish, but I'll lean Cardinals. I would say Phillies, the Phillies would be favored. This is just kind of like a big picture thing. At Diamondbacks, I think it's toss up E, but I'll basically, because the Diamondbacks finished so strong last year, I'm going to lean towards the Diamondbacks in that one. You're clearly favored against the A's. Brewers, I think, is a toss-up type series. Back to the Diamondbacks. Mets are a team that are kind of like the Padres, kind of like the Cardinals, I think. Were crap last year, should be better this year. I think that's a toss-up E series. And I'll just go ahead and say that the Cardinals are going to be favored against the Tigers, even though I think the Tigers will be better. But that's a lot of toss-up series. And then you got to start with the Dodgers, who should be a juggernaut. But then look, the Cardinals are going to have to try to win 2 out of 3 of a lot of tough series there in the first month.
They are, and I think that Dodgers series is really interesting. Like if you can split, because that's a 4-game series, it feels a lot different to come out of the gates against Yamamoto. He'll pitch against Otani. He'll hit in every game. It feels a lot different, I think, for the Cardinals, who started so bad last year, and we've made so much about that bad start and how it impacted what they did thereafter. If they could split that series, I think you just kind of can go sigh of relief, head on to San Diego, and move on with your season. If it starts out 1-3 or 0-4, I don't know. That I'm not saying that's going to tank the whole thing, but that's going to there are going to be the little rumblings of like, oh man, is this here we go again? Like if they can go out and split with the Dodgers, I think that would mean quite a lot. But I agree with you. The only series that I really see that hey, you should be able to dominate the series is Oakland. And you know who knows how they're going to be. You're probably bad again, right? But they may not be the same team that they were last year. Maybe they're plucky. Maybe they make it a little bit difficult on you. Those Phillies and D-backs kind of series this early in the year, teams that they had good years last year, but I think they're both hungry for more. Philly is still hungry to say, man, can we get this World Series thing? Can we make this happen this year? And the D-backs got a taste of it, so they're going to be, hot to trot, trying to make things happen. So it's a tough start. It really is. And so I would say 500, even a game below. I don't know exactly if that's 31 games we named or whatever it is. But if you're like in that around hovering 500 position, I think that would be honestly good enough. I don't know how Cardinals fans will feel on May 1st if that's what it is, but I honestly think that would be okay.
All right, from Patriot Sub Vet. How much coordination slash feedback slash info share is happening between Cards players outside of the organization, hitting programs, and Turner Ward? I don't know a ton about this, but I do know you see all these guys, Arenado, Goldie, Nootbaar over the years going to drive line. Hell, you even see, look, Matt Holliday has become his own. It's funny on the radio. I called him a hitting guru. He said he didn't like the word guru,
Okay.
but clearly, whether it's Joey Gallo, Matt Carpenter, his sons, a lot of folks, a lot of big leaguers and young prospects are going over to Stillwater, Oklahoma to hit in their amazing hitting barn. So I think a lot of guys have their own hitting guys, guys they came up with, guys back at home. But go ahead.
From like a hitting strategy, it's hard to answer the question, but I can say from like a, hey, this season matters. Let's make this thing happen this year perspective. I think that's happening. Like they talked a lot about the group text chains that are kind of going off throughout the offseason of putting everybody in the mindset of let's not let last year happen again. Like I think there is a motivation and a hunger to the group. Now, is that an easy thing to say at a winter warm up? Yeah, you don't need to get too carried away with it, but I do think that there's some truth to it as far as how the players are viewing it. Last year wasn't fun for anybody. And the heavy part of it was that you knew early on, even if you couldn't say it publicly, they all knew early on, like this is going to be what it is, isn't it? And like it's never really been this for St. Louis Cardinals. So we're all kind of reckoning with that in our own way privately. I think it was hard on a lot of guys, and I think there is reason to believe that it can be different this year. And that I think guys are communicating in that way. Now, as far as like who's communicating with whom about what hitting strategy, that's kind of hard to say, but I think it's a fair question. And as you mentioned, guys do kind of go outside and get perspectives, and that's probably a healthy, good thing. It's not a knock on necessarily the coaching staff to do so.
And I'm joking, but it is such a winter warm-up-y response. Like, we're gonna win this year because our group text is so active. We
I
love
wanted
each
to
other.
I wanted to say it before because I knew it would be the comment. I knew it would be your comment. So like I hear how
Yes.
it sounds too, but that for whatever it's worth to you, that's what's going on.
I know, and I'm just kidding. Okay, so Omaha is coming wants me to ask you about Brock Purdy and Kyle Shanahan, but I'm gonna move on just because I want to stick to baseball. But Omaha, I did see your question. Here's a fun one. Tyler, who's the best Cardinals position player pitcher ever? Anyone ever pitched more than just once or twice? Jed Jerko comes to mind. For me, early on, I feel like Aaron Miles was the guy.
He did it a lot, didn't he? Yeah, he used to do it quite a
Seems like
bit.
it.
I don't remember, like, how effective he was, but they did keep going back to him. But was that because he, like with a lot of guys it was interesting at winter warm-up, people are asking Mason Wynn because he came out, like, officially out of the draft in high school. He was gonna do the pitcher slash shortstop thing, and then it very, very quickly died and never to be revisited again. And he even said, like, "If I were called upon I'd be the last person we would use as a pitcher. I wouldn't do it in a game." And is it almost like the guys that don't have the marquee throwing arms, that's almost who you use because it is obviously a spot that doesn't matter in a game that's been decided. We actually saw the Cardinals do it in a winning effort with guys like Yachty and Albert. But
Mhm.
maybe that's the reason that Aaron Miles, because he didn't maybe have the strongest throwing arm that you were worried about jeopardizing in some form or fashion. I was trying to find his pitching numbers on Baseball Reference, but I haven't been able to locate that. So I don't know. Maybe Aaron Miles would be the answer, Charlie.
But yeah, how about like you said, just go maybe Mason Wynn jumps out there and he throws
Can't
97,
do
and
it.
then all of a sudden, hey, you're going back to a two-way player. They'll never do that
They'll
because of that.
never exactly, and because they don't wanna it's a mindset thing, right? Like, when
Right.
Rick Ankiel was an outfielder, it's like, no, he stopped the pitching thing for a reason at the time. They're not gonna try and toe that line with guys, but maybe Burleson can be the guy kinda moving forward. I did find Aaron Miles did it, 3 times, 3 total, appearances, 5 total innings. No, pardon me, 5 innings, 5 games, and gave up 2 earned runs, so pretty good ERA. I think he may
Dang.
qualify here.
I'll take that. Okay, Dalton M. Thompson has a fantasy trade request for your league. I'm going to skip that one.
Stop it.
But his top question is, and it's a good one, is there a record that the Cardinals could reach at the trade deadline that would permit them to spend, or is it strictly a feel thing for Mo? I'll go first. I think it's basically the opposite of last year. It's the previous 2 years, and I'm a broken record, but it's what 21, 22 when they get Lester and Hap and LeBlanc before that, and then it's the following year when they get Quintana and Montgomery. Especially coming off a crap year, to me, all the Cardinals have to do is be around 500. If they are in striking distance, if they're 5 games out at the deadline, I do think they'll probably have to add, let's be real, they'll probably have to add a starter and a reliever. Somebody will be hurt or bad. They'll need a reliever. I do think they'll do that at the deadline. I do think the Cardinals will be in the spot to do that.
I think so too, and I hate the payroll conversation is always a tricky one because everybody thinks they know what it currently is, and nobody really does because, like, it's always calculated different and oh well there's this that's the deferral and there's constant arguments about it on Twitter to where I'm just like I don't even care. But I think that with what they said they would be willing to spend and what they have spent, it has left the room to do more if more is necessary. So I think if they're in contention, even if they're like having a great year and they're in first place and everything's great, I still think they'll add because they'll sense that okay, there's room to really maybe make some noise. Everything has gone to plan and we can supplement from that. So yeah, I think if they're in the mix, the minimum is kind of that J Hap tier where they trade a guy like Lane Thomas at the time. I think he was the Lester deal, but they trade a guy who at the time they were like, he doesn't have a spot here. So let's get somebody we'll actually use. And I know that Lane Thomas has gone on to be very serviceable for the Nationals, but like that's sort of the type of floor that I think you set. And then pending injuries or what team needs might be, they could do something bigger. I think if they felt it would help them. I think the payroll does set up to allow for that.
I have to say, just because, and this is I love my guy Jimmy the Cat Hayes, but this is a semantics. When you said serviceable, to me, that's a slight. I think Lane Thomas is pretty dang good. I have to check because again, my memory's not that great.
He's had
But
some good
last year,
numbers.
Lane Thomas career OPS plus 108. Last year he was 114. So I think it's fair to say, look, we're giving props to guys like Newt Bar and Donovan and whoever. Lane Thomas is pretty dang good.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a 112 OPS plus with the Nationals over the course of 3 years, which is still below Brendan Donovan and Newbar, the guys we've talked about for their careers. However, yeah, Lane Thomas has been, let's put it this way, he's been worlds above what he was with the Cardinals in 2020 and 2021 when he looked like he had never seen a baseball field before. I think that COVID haze thing was real for him because, I mean, he looked dreadful. And I was somebody that really liked Lane Thomas before that. But at the time, I was like, you can't possibly defend this. So, like, there's a whole conversation to be had about why the Cardinals don't get the most out of their guys and then they go elsewhere and do well. But at the time when they traded him for Lester, I think it was, you can't say that at the time that wasn't the deal that made sense for the way the club was structured. But Lane Thomas, I'm so sorry for using serviceable. He's been good with Washington and a guy that's stuck around. I mean, he's going to continue to stick around as. But when I almost say serviceable because like we know the Washington Nationals are bad and they expect to be bad. And that's been like the case the whole time he's been there. So it's easier for a team like that to give runs to Lane Thomas and say, we see raw materials here. Let's see what it looks like in 500 plate appearances. It's always like the teams that get a chance to do that with guys that the Cardinals send them there and then they look good. That's like the constant change of scenery conversation that happens. I think it can be a real thing for guys. And for him, it certainly was.
Yeah, and I was half kidding, obviously, about the service well, but I will say this on the topic. The Cardinals have been so bad at trading away the good outfielders and keeping, let's be real, the wrong ones, that they've also lost the benefit of the doubt on this topic. And it's funny, it's like we always talk about change of scenery, but it's also a lot of guys that didn't get very much opportunity. Now, we started this conversation about Lane Thomas, but you can go back to Randy Arozarena, no real opportunity. Lane Thomas got rocked by COVID. That messed up his career for
Yeah.
a solid year and a half. So it's kind of different. But again, to me, I mean, that's why I expect Tyler O'Neill to hit 35 bombs this year. Like, it doesn't matter until you switch the trend. Here's a maybe good analogy. I was working in Michigan when the Lions drafted the wrong wide receiver 86 straight years until they did it again with Calvin Johnson and they got it right. Until the Cardinals actually don't let an outfielder leave who becomes really, really good, they've lost the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair characterization, and I don't know what the answer is. Like I said, there's a conversation to be had. Why can't they get the most out of these guys? Because sometimes when they're trading them away, a Rosarena, not a good example because he, like you said, never got a chance here. But like with Elaine Thomas, we saw it play out. With Tyler O'Neill this past year, we saw it play out, and it absolutely did not work. So it's kind of interesting. It's not just the guys that they should have given a chance to, but never found time to do so. It's also the ones that they let play out and then they let play out for another year and it was still bad that then go somewhere else and are good. Why that is, I don't know, but I think you're right that that is a trend at this point and one that you do sort of just expect to come to fruition. And by the way, I don't think it hurts Tyler O'Neill that he's a power hitter from the right side and he's got that wall at Fenway. He's going to hit balls over that wall and probably put some holes in that wall with the power that he has. He's a good fit for that ballpark and he'll probably be good there.
And by the way, before we move on here quick, I'm going to throw Dylan Carlson in that bucket because he's another, it looks like, outfielder that there's a very good chance they were wrong on, where you do go to a guy like him opposed to some of these other prospects that you maybe traded away. You're banking on him. He's now your fourth outfielder. Can he perform beyond that? Sure, but he has to prove it. But there's another guy where right now, at this point in his career, it looks like they kept him too long and he has almost no trade value.
And that's probably right. But that is also what happened to O'Neill. And yet we see more upside with O'Neill because the power has been there. For Carlson, it's not really been, the hitting against right handed pitching has sort of been the bugaboo for Dylan Carlson. And he did come up so young to where maybe he's still developing and figuring out how to do that at the big league level. But it's going to be a tough road to hoe for him this year simply because we don't really expect him to be granted the playing time and the runway to be able to work through some of those issues. He feels like the primary type of guy that should probably go somewhere else, like a Nationals, where they could put him in center field for, 140 games and see what happens. Granted, he hasn't been healthy enough to do that for the Cardinals when they've wanted to in the past. So it is always kind of a double edged sword with that. But he's one that I'll be curious to see how it plays out. Because again, if Tyler O'Neill had the arm's length thing with Ollie, and part of that was like getting thrown under the bus, but part of it was like, are you an everyday guy? What are you to this team? And kind of feeling the weight of that. Is Dylan going to feel that same weight with Ollie this year? And will that allow him to spread his wings the way he needs to? Probably remains to be seen. So it could be that Dylan Carlson, after this year doesn't go well, goes somewhere else, revives his career, or maybe he goes somewhere else. And they traded Stephen Piscotty under very different circumstances because of the family situation for him. And that was a solid that the Cardinals did for the Piscotty family. But like he sort of kind of fizzled out after he's not one that you say, oh man, he got away from a baseball perspective. Is Dylan Carlson going to maybe kind of go that way or the way of Elaine Thomas? I think will be interesting to see. But it's almost like a foregone conclusion that he doesn't necessarily feel long for this team, but he also hasn't got the trade value right now to move. That's kind of the way I would look at it for Dylan. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope he's great with the Cardinals and stays. But, the writing on the wall right now doesn't look as favorable when they're baking him in as the fourth outfielder to start the year. That's never a good sign.
Yeah, and it goes one of two ways probably. He either has the bad year and then literally his trade value is zero, or he has the good year and the Cardinals keep him. That's probably the way it's going to go. Okay, so next question is, or comment, Jaden Radford says, the starting rotation doesn't blow me away like I had hoped. And I think that's fair because before the season started, the offseason, I said the Cardinals need two pitchers better than Miles Michaelis. I don't think they've done that on paper. They got one in Sonny Gray. They got two back end guys in Lynn and Gibson. I've said this 5,000 times. So to me, they didn't do. I wanted the trade for the high upside guy or the whoever the hell, the Logan Gilbert, Cease. Maybe you could say it's a pipe dream. I think the Cardinals starting rotation will be okay, but I did expect more.
Yeah, and those deals are hard to make. They're hard to stomach, first of all, because you're going to trade away some of those really good hitters we talked about. They'd never trade Nootbaar. That's a non-starter. I have told people the whole way through, so is Brendan Donovan. He's a non-starter. I don't know if I get a sense for how they feel on Gorman. I think they might have done it if it were on the table for them to get a Cease or a Gilbert by trading Gorman and maybe a pitching prospect, whether it's Tink Hence or Graceffo or whoever it might be. I think the Cardinals might have been willing to do that. I don't know that, and again, I don't know this for a fact that Mo could hear this and say, no, he's full of crap, and he would be right and I'd be wrong. But I think that would be the type of move that would have been required to get one of those big time pitching guys who also didn't get traded. Like, again, the teams did not trade those players, so it tells you they were probably asking for quite a bit for them, and that's why it doesn't come to fruition. And so the Cardinals, sensing that that might be the case, like, let's say they played out the whole offseason and went down that path, and you do get Blake Snell and Montgomery signed by now, because most people would have predicted that they would have signed by now. And the Cardinals missed out on Lynn and Gibson, who they kind of had an eye on, and they couldn't make the trade they wanted to make. Now you're kind of like, uh-oh. And I think the last thing they wanted is to end up in uh-oh territory when it comes to this rotation. So they built the bottom of it out and tried to build up from there and got Sonny Gray through that process. I just think it was the simpler, easier path, and it was the one that involved less risk for them completely missing out on some of their targets.
Okay, so we have a ton more questions. So
Yeah,
I
we
think
do.
we can wrap up here after another one or two. And then if you want, we can next week. Are you going to spring training, by the way?
I will be at spring training, not by next week.
Okay,
We're good on next Thursday, but after that, I'm heading out the Monday after the Super Bowl. I'm going to drive. So,
cool. Okay, so we can do more of these questions. There's so many. We're not going to get to all of them. I
yeah.
was thinking about we release it in two parts anyway, but we'll just finish this one and we'll release it and then we'll do one next week. So this will be our last, I think, substantive baseball question. Maybe we'll end with a fun one. But I think it's a good big picture thought. It's from Liam. And he just says, I don't see how this roster is any better than last year's. It's a pretty simple question. What do you think? I mean, they had a terrible year last year on paper. Do you think the roster, is it the same as last year? Is it slightly better? Is it slightly worse? What do you think?
I think it's better. I think the roster is better because I think for the guys that were bad or below their standard, like Goldie and Arenado, there's, unless you're subscribing to they're cooked because they're old, which I don't subscribe for either of those guys, then they should probably be better. The clubhouse is going to feel better because they're not behind the eight ball the whole season. Like, I think that was a real tangible thing that feels intangible because it's like, well, they're the same players. Why couldn't they just play better? The mood wasn't right. And you can blame whatever you want for it. I welcome fans to do it. Pick the thing you want to blame. Pick Ollie, pick Tyler, pick Wilson, pick the pitchers that were whining to Wilson or about Wilson, pick Mozeliak, whatever makes you feel best, pick that and be convinced that that's what it was. And you can be right. It's irrelevant for what's about to happen in 2024, though. I look at the pitching specifically, and I do think that despite the fact that Montgomery was a good pitcher for them, and now they don't have him, I think you upgraded that spot by getting Sonny Gray. I think you upgraded by getting Gibson and Lynn instead of Flaherty and Wainwright, because Flaherty wasn't good last year. And he was probably a little bit of a drag on some of those things that were going on behind the scenes, right? So I think from that perspective, you're better. And they have taken out guys like Hudson and Woodford, who felt like they had a capped ceiling. Like, oh my gosh, if they can get through 5 innings, 3 runs, you survive that day and maybe you win a game. But they also had a floor that we saw too many times. We also saw Steven Matz at his worst at the beginning of the year. And I feel like maybe that's what it is again. You get a mixed bag with Steven Matz. But like, there's enough, I think, of stabilization to the rotation that it's better. Where it absolutely can go off the rails, Charlie, is if the plan to get those quality starts from the Michaelises and the Gibson and the Lynn contingent, if one of those two of them get hurt, all right, is Zach Thompson going to be able to do 160 innings of 30 starts? I don't know. And then who's behind him? So like, that's where it could absolutely go off the rails. But I think they specifically designed to try and say, like, this is our rotation day one in February. And we think that there's a decent enough chance of it being our rotation day one of April because we got durable guys that we think can last. Whether that happens, I don't know. It has to for it to work. I'll admit that. And I think there's a better chance of it happening because they've got these grizzled vets that kind of know how to get through the rigors and know how it goes. That's what they're banking on this year. I don't know if it works, Charlie. That's their plan, but that would be my case for why it's better. Do you see it like I do, or do you push back on it and say, dude, guys get hurt in spring every year, and this is going to be a problem?
This is interesting to me because I think the position player group is essentially the same. You're adding a young Mason Wynn, who I love big picture, but could be rocky offensively first year. I do think a lot of guys are going to be 5 to 10 to 15% better, which is huge if a lot of people do that. And you just get a little better health on the position player side. Bullpen, it seems like it's about the same
It's about the same.
ish. I do like Andrew Kittredge. I do think adding the innings will help the bullpen, as I said earlier. But I think the rotation is the interesting piece, and I think what you brought up is about Kyle Gibson and Jack Flaherty. For example, you said Flaherty didn't have a good year. I would push back and say, well, Jack Flaherty ended the year terribly with the Orioles as he's pushed to the bullpen. Now, Jack Flaherty with the Cardinals, were those numbers that much different than Kyle Gibson if you look at their
It's the
ERA and you look at their FIPS? So, and then remember, you're losing Monty, who was an absolute stud, but
yes,
you're also losing Wayno, who was one of the worst pitchers in the history of baseball for a
yes.
starting pitcher. Miles Michaelis should be better just because you couldn't have had a worse start for Miles Michaelis. So, I don't know is the answer. I think if you just ask me, I do think the starting rotation is going to be better, but I don't know. I get why people don't agree.
It's the way that I expect Kyle Gibson and Jack Flaherty to come by their numbers to arrive at their FIP, to arrive at their ERAs that I think will be different. I don't know if that's a feel thing that Brendan Schaefer is subscribing to the party line or if there is reason to back that up. Because I look at Jack Flaherty's numbers and go, well, here, some of his worst starts were 2 innings, 10 runs, 3 innings, 7 runs, 4 innings, 6 runs. He had a number of those. Kyle Gibson kind of did too, right? So, like, Lance Lynn was not impervious to those types of outings. So maybe it's a case of like, we're building these guys up as, oh, they're going to be reliable and they're always going to get through 5 or 6 innings, even if they give up 5 runs. I don't know. Maybe that's not 100% the case, Charlie, and there's not as many differences from last year's team. It sounds good in the offseason. It's one of those things that you say, hey, they're going to, the ERAs, not all of them are created equal, and they're going to be a better team with a slight improvement to ERA because they're not going to be run out of as many games in the early innings. But I'm looking at Kyle Gibson from last year. He gave up 9 in a start. He gave up 7 in a start. Now he made it into the 6th and into the 5th in those outings, but you're still probably losing those games, and his team lost both of those games. So that's kind of fair. I think Lance Lynn is honestly a huge key to all of this because if you view him as back end guy going to eat some innings, then yeah, maybe it's not going to be as rosy as the Cardinals would say. If Lance Lynn has whatever he did in 2022, like I think it was sub 4. I think it was like a 3.99 ERA. If Lance Lynn is a dog again, which maybe he will be, put him in Bush, don't give up as many homers, kind of have a light of fire under him because he doesn't want to be the pitcher he was last year. He's got to almost be like better than Miles Michaelis, I think. And if that is the way it shakes out, Michaelis is like a solid 3. He reverts back on the FIP a little bit to what he was in 2022, which was solid, gives you another 200 innings. And it's last year's Gray with Lynn of old, or even of a year ago, like before 2023, with Michaelis being like a 4.3 ERA innings eater at the 3 spot. I don't know. That I think is absolutely better than having to run out Drew Rom for starts and Dakota Hudson for starts the way that they did last year. I could be wrong, but that's kind of where I see it is a little better. And I think the idea is that the clubhouse will be in a much better spot. But that also, how many games does that win you is a fair question for Cardinals fans to have.
And it's fun. We just talk about ERA. I think it's fair to say, like, if you really lay it out, you don't need much. If Sonny Gray can be in the threes, okay, and not closer to 4. Let's just say if
Three and a half.
Sonny Gray's 3.5 or below, and then if everybody else can be in the 4s, but not pushing 5, right? And that's possible. It's possible that at the end of the year, and maybe you say Kyle Gibson's 4.5, Lanson's 4.5, whatever. I'm just saying we don't want it to be to close to 5. But if Michaelis Matz, Lynn, and Kyle Gibson are all from a 4 ERA to 4.5, I think you're going to win a lot of baseball games.
Yeah, because I think like a guy like Kittredge does help the bullpen. And what is he? Your fourth option behind Helsley and Gallegos and JoJo from the left side. And maybe one of what happened last year too that we don't talk a lot about. The Cardinals took the strategy of bullpenning that I think they should have taken in the offseason prior to 2023, which is throw a bunch of mediocre, maybe problematic arms at it who haven't figured it out and see if a couple of them do. None of them did. They were all either hurt or bad or whatever the case was. None of that like dumpster diving on relievers worked. Like not one of them worked last year. And this year they're kind of doing it a little bit, but maybe Heim Bloom's helping out a little, and maybe they're finding some better names, right? Like they're doing it again. They haven't spent up on any relievers necessarily, but they're getting guys in that bucket where like if a couple of them work out, then the bullpen does look better and they have an easier job if the rotation gets deeper into games and asks lesser of what the bullpen has to provide. So like that would be the path. And it's an aspect that's not talked about a lot because the bullpen thing is like they didn't spend. They're doing basically what they did last year. But think about the guys that they had at spring training where you go, hey, maybe Guillermo Zuniga. You're like, who? He never was even a factor. And that was everybody that they tried it with last year. I think they're doing it again, but with a little bit of a different flair, and maybe it works differently than it did in 2023. That could matter too.
Okay, let's end on this one. We have a million more questions. We'll get to them more. Maybe do another one next week. Maybe I'll do one on my own. Maybe we'll do both of that. So
What an
here's the last
ass.
question.
He's going to take
Well,
him for
no,
himself. I knew it.
no, dude, there's probably 4 hours worth of questions, honestly. So much love to the people on Twitter. I didn't even put it out there on YouTube. We'd have got more on YouTube. So here we go. Thomas Gauvain. Who will replace Tyler O'Neill as the strongest Cardinal now? Stubby Clapp isn't allowed to be an option. Now, I'm not down there really at all like I used to be. So I'll just say, from what I've seen, you know who's a very underrated, real strong dude is Miles Michaelis. He's
Yeah.
he's built, dude. He's put
Yeah.
together like a pitcher that can log 200 innings. So what do you think?
Do people think of Paul Goldschmidt as yoked? They should, is my point. Like
They
I don't know
should. That's
I
a
don't know
good
if they
point.
think of
Good
him
point.
that way, but they should. That was going to be the other guy that I would bring up. Yeah, I'd like to see Miles Michaelis and Paul Goldschmidt arm wrestle. But maybe like left arms so that nobody's hurting their pitching arm or anything. But like those guys are some two strong dudes. I'm trying to think if there's anybody else that should be jumping out to me that doesn't immediately. Those are the two that I would have brought up Miles as well as a guy who underrated strong guy for sure.
And they're big also, because you can have
Yes.
a smaller guy who's wound real tight. Like Harrison Bader wasn't the biggest dude, but he's a strong dude. But both Miles and Paul Goldschmidt are big ass country strong dudes.
Well, Harrison Bader was built too. He just wasn't a strong guy. Or sorry, a tall guy. He wasn't like
That's what I'm saying. That's
as
what I'm saying.
heighty.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, Goldie and Miles both pretty tall and pretty built. I think that's fair. So probably pretty strong dudes as well.
And I won't on this one. I won't ask you the last question, which is from my guy Mike. Who's the hottest dude on the team? We'll
Oh,
get to
that was
that one.
okay.
Yeah, we'll get to that one next week. So we'll
Is that
wrap
the
up. We've
YouTube
already
after
gone.
dark? I don't know when that one ends up.
Yes, that's for
Okay.
Skinamax After Dark YouTube special for subscribers only. And we'll all wear our
Now
underwear.
you told me there was only one thing you wouldn't do for money on YouTube, and it geared toward that area. So I don't know. I'm skeptical of whether that one's ever going to see the light of day.
Well, if I get in better shape, maybe. If I get in
Well,
better
then,
shape, maybe I'll start stripping. All right.
yikes.
Good times, great oldies. Thank you, Brendan Schaefer. What's the name of this podcast? It's called
Low hanging fruit.
Hanging Fruit,
That's the
episode
one.
4. We'll come back next week, and we got a ton of questions, so we'll get to almost all of them. Brendan, thank you as always, sir, and thank you for watching, folks. Comment, like, subscribe, share the channel, share the videos on social media in your group text for Cardinals fans, and we'll do it all year long. Brendan, great stuff, buddy.
Appreciate the time. We had a wonderful time today.
Yes, we did. And follow Brendan. What is it? Be Shafe
No
Daily.
kidding. We gotta get this going in the early. I'm missing out on all those viewers who click out when we start to just like talk about nothing. Missing out on the plugs. Be Shafe Daily. Brendan Schaefer, YouTube is Brendan Schaefer, St. Louis Cardinals writer. If you just type in my name on YouTube, just subscribe to the channel because that would help too.
And I got to push back one more time,
Oh,
okay?
here we go.
Because you said once we start talking about nothing, I thought I stopped this podcast at a good time about
Yeah.
70 minutes before we really started talking about nothing. I actually thought it was pretty substantive baseball talk. Am I
No,
wrong?
it was, but once people are like, "Hey, they're wrapping up," click, they're out of here. They're not hearing this at all. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, they are.
you see the YouTube analytics better than I do. So I don't know. Just subscribe to my thing too. We put it on Charlie's because he's got more people, but I'll catch him like in 2027 or something.
All right. Well, you can always invite me on yours. That's never happened.
Well, I could, but you're a busy guy. I mean, you got a lot to get to. You've got a lot of irons in the fire, as they say, and we already talk once a week. So I still think that there will come a time where we take off with low hanging fruit, and you're like, let's just do a second time per week, and that's when we really start to get it going. But we'll see. Right now,
Oh,
it's not the time
dude.
because there's nothing to talk about.
Oh, during the season, easy.
I
We
think
could
so.
do it almost every day for sure. Right now, there's nothing to talk about. All right,
There's
I'll
no
shut up. We need to shut up. We need to end the show. This is what I always do. I should have ended it 5 minutes ago, but
people
a
like
couple mid
people like this. That's what you always used to say on your show with Martin. People really like this stuff. Okay, maybe they do.
that last that last mid roll ad always helps. All right, thanks guys. Thanks Brendan. See you guys later. Have a great weekend, everybody. See ya.